Welcome to MedShark Insider with Bill Fukui, your expert host on all things medical marketing and SEO.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another MedShark Insider. And today I wanted to chat about lead management and sales. It's such a huge part of our job is generating the leads, but when it comes to leads coming to the practice, a lot of that is out of our control. So today I actually have a special guest. He's actually a surgeon, and he is also the owner of AdVital, which is a software management, lead management software. But I wanted to really talk more about just generally, let's start about your background. Being an MD, how did you get into the lead management business?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Starting out as a doctor and then going backwards into this lead management, it was pretty much from like childhood. I grew up on a motel and had to manage leads. At that time, they weren't called leads. They were called phone calls, right? Like you had the old rotary phone and you had to pick up and you had to pick up within a certain time. And, you got held accountable from, I got held accountable from my parents, right? In terms of like, hey, what happened? Why didn't they book why didn't they get a reservation? Why didn't you get a card on file? Like all this other stuff, right? Like even the transition of like, oh, they said they were going to pay in cash or this and that. So in terms of, when I got done with residency and I got into private practice, it was like any other business. And I was like, oh my God, I'm back in childhood again. And I was like, oh, wow, this is the whole business side that they've never even talked about in medicine. I mean, I literally got little, brushes of it through residency or some private practice and like rotations and stuff like that. But I never like knew the nuts and bolts of it. Right. And I was like, oh, how in the world are we going to do this? And so I was like, all right, well, I'll hire a practice manager. We'll hire the right people and the stuff will just fall into place. And that was wrong. Right. And so in terms of each one of these little kind of failure points, I learned from my failures of what I needed to do to have a process in place. And that was, it took me a few years to figure out that I actually needed a process versus I'm like, all right, well, I can hire for the right personnel and then they'll do the job. But then what I didn't take into account for is that the personnel leaves and the process leaves with them. And so that was what kind of led me into the lead management world and the other piece of it. And it came back to childhood, right? It's like, my parents always said, hey, we have to measure what's happening so that we can manage the expectations and then we can improve upon it month over month. But it was like that whole philosophy that also leads into private practice to say, if you're not measuring it, you can't manage it. And if you can't manage it, you can't improve it. And you're going to be stuck, right? In terms of you're going to be defined by what the market tells you. And that's where I think we struggled in my practice, with COVID and all these other things happening. And that's what kind of led me into lead management and more so of almost like all the different metrics that you need to measure in a private practice to actually get it to improve. Because we as surgeons want to improve our work in terms of the surgeries that we do and the patient care that we do, but the actual business side of it also needs improvement if we're going to make the greatest impact in our lifetime.
Now, and you talk about, being able to track the data that otherwise you're flying by the seat of your pants, right? You're just day to day, week to week, and when I talk to clients, they're like, especially during the pandemic, when we talked about the pandemic, it was, let's face it, it was fruitful. It was like low-lying fruit everywhere, right? If you weren't busy, then something was seriously wrong with your practice, right? In most cases, right?
Yeah, so, in most cases. And I think that there's some hampers in terms of like places to operate, right? And so it's like, I think there was a huge, if you didn't make the transition to non-surgical and, get those people in terms of foot traffic, or if you were allowed to see that foot traffic during certain periods of time, then I think you profited. On the other side of it, when you were handcuffed by not having an operating room or, not having a busy med spa or converting over to non, you really struggle.
Yeah, and I actually have a client that is that actually uses you guys, and actually that's how we kind of met, was through common clients. Your company never reached out to sell me anything. I actually stumbled onto you guys. I kind of felt like you guys were my own discovery, because I stumbled onto you guys. It wasn't at a trade show or something that you came up and we talked. It was because of a mutual client, and I learned firsthand kind of what you guys were doing. One of the things that, a recent client that we were talking about is he's projecting, revenues and leads based on revenue. It's a way of, planning for the future. And we're
Uh-huh.
talking, even during the pandemic, everybody says, oh, I'm booked out 5, 6 months or whatever it may be. But we all know that that's kind of that ebb and flow.
Mhm.
It's now starting to taper off. This demand that we saw for the past 2 years or more is kind of leveled off, and in many cases, we're also seeing search volume and consumer activity starting to decline. So, being able to project and being able to plan and budget and everything else, what you're talking about, most practices never really thought, that they didn't put the time in. And quite honestly, it was just business was just there, right?
Absolutely. And I think that most people, have rested on their laurels, right? Of like, hey, what they've built or, and they need to continue to produce. But in terms of these productions, if you don't measure your marketing activity to actual revenue, it's really hard, right? And that was the one thing that also like we realized in our practice is like, we didn't have marketing attribution all the way to revenue. We only had it through like click-through rates and impressions, what marketing agencies were telling us. But then for some reason, our bank accounts weren't matching up with all the activity, right? And so then you're like, okay, well, what do I do? Which part of my marketing is working? Where do I need to place more, activity or energy or effort and the other parts? And we just didn't know, right? And so that was the other reason for creating the software, because it helps give you that transparency in marketing, from all the way from a prospect to a patient to a procedure.
You know, let's jump in real quickly.
Mhm.
Because we're talking about a lot of things that practices, many surgeons, doctors haven't really even looked at yet.
Yep.
In terms of, we've heard about, leads, and that's what they get from their agencies all the time. This is how much traffic came into the website. This is what we, got in terms of, click-throughs on pay-per-click advertising or organic traffic. It gives you on, that top of the funnel data,
Mhm.
but when it comes into the practice in the form of a lead and let me know what type of lead, are you tracking all the way to revenue, and how does that all work?
Yeah, and so in terms of leads, we're tracking them from any website, social media, any form of ads, a billboard. It can be any marketing technique that they're using in their practice. And if we can tie it to either a specific phone number or a specific pathway, then we can track it and then give it attribution all the way down to the endpoint of revenue, because we integrate with the EMRs. And so we decided to do that enormously heavy lift of figuring out how to be a universal connector between all these different platforms that people use for marketing and connecting it to the EMR. So that way we can have those two pieces of data attached, so we can have the clarity in actual the marketing that's working and the marketing that's not. And sometimes it's really important to look at what's not working, so you're not spending more time, energy, effort, money on that activity.
And I would agree with that. I'd also take the other side too. If it's really working, why not spend more on it,
Absolutely. If you put in $1 and it prints you out four, why not keep doing that, right? And so
right?
it's a win, right? And you want to find that in your practice, because you'll find that, it's Pareto's rule of 80-20, right? 20% of your marketing is giving you 80% of your revenue. Now, what 20% that is, you need to go figure that out. And I think as practices, we've kind of been blind to it, or we've been fortunate enough that we've been busy enough that we haven't had to look at it. But with economical changes in the digital age of marketing and all the other stuff right now in terms of social media, I think we'd be fools if we didn't look at it now.
Yeah, and you kind of touched on it a little bit now, is the diversity of how practices are getting, leads and business. and it's changed. There was a time early on when it was just, I'm old school, so I'm older than probably every person on this attending this podcast. But back then it was just yellow pages. You ran yellow pages. You had one thing to market on, and it was yellow pages. Then it kind of turned into more media types of advertising, and then the internet came around, cable television. Now all of a sudden you've got every digital channel out there, social media platforms. So does the software track like all the different medium channels, even traditional television and radio, that type of stuff?
Yeah, it can track pretty much every single traditional and new age terms of marketing, right? In terms of the older forms of television and a magazine, all we do is tie a specific phone number to it. So you can see, that part of the attribution. In terms of partial attribution, that's a piece that no one's really figured out yet. I know Google has been working on it for a period of time, and that's where probably the thing is like, hey, how much can I attribute a billboard to? If they drive by it and they keep seeing it and they keep seeing it, and then they decide to then look you up on the internet, I can't give that a billboard attribution, because now the only thing that we will see is then you found our website on the internet and do the next thing. So partial attribution is super hard, but I think in terms of first and last attribution, those are the two segments that we're looking at to get a clearer picture on what's working and what's not. And that gives us 80% of the data, right? I think the 20% we're missing in terms of the partial attribution, we'll see what happens with Google here in the near future with some of those things. And I think it'll be interesting to see, as AI rolls out, how that impacts a lot of the marketing in terms of what you're doing, how we respond, all the different segments in our practice that we can use AI to leverage all those communication channels.
The funny thing is when I was kind of evolving into the digital space, it was hard to track, all that stuff. And you're right, the general attributions, what we ended up doing in a practice are looking to see if there are ways of measuring, things. Google Analytics is a huge value to helping you overlay the data. Mm-hmm. So when that billboard goes up, the date that went up. Yep. You should be able to see an increase. Or if I, purchase a big display thing with RealSelf, a lot of the stuff that's in there, you can see how much is being attributed. Or if I see a spike in branded search, like my practice name, because on a billboard, you got 5 seconds, maybe 5 seconds to capture somebody's attention. So what are they going to remember? Your practice name, maybe a phone number, but most likely the name. So you typically see your branded search volume go up. People looking for your name, the business name, doctor's name, etc. That all goes up almost identically. You can overlay that with other marketing and advertising that you're doing, and you'll see spikes in things. And if you didn't, that's when you can say, well, maybe it's not really doing what I think we wanted it to. But you should see that.
Yeah, and I think you alluded to a good point. You said 5 seconds, right? So the latest studies on YouTube, it's 1.8 seconds is the amount of attention that you have to capture their attention for them to watch the rest of the video. Now, in terms of a billboard, since you're driving, you're stuck, right? You can't change the billboard. I mean, in the new age, there'll be a little swipe and the billboard will change, right? And it'll be rapid fire and stuff like that. But, in terms of the attention spans have changed, the content needs to be more attractive, has to be more engaging, all these different pieces, right, to get you the actual patients, the prospects that you need in the door to turn into patients, and then to do the next thing in your practice, right? If they qualify for the next thing in your practice.
So let me ask, I'm going to back up a little bit.
Go ahead.
Going from surgeon to now digital marketing, I get my parents, I grew up in a greenhouse business, right? So when people say, in an earlier life, I used to be a florist, they're like, wow, that's a huge change. But, there are some overlapping things. our life experiences.
Yeah.
Uh, are you gonna now? Are you currently? Are you planning on working with AdVital exclusively, or you're still a surgeon, right?
Yeah, I'm still searching right now. Plans are to do the transition because ultimately the goal is to help as many providers as possible. And that means doctors, med spas, everybody in healthcare. I think that there's going to be a two-payer system. One's going to be cash-based and one's going to be insurance-based as reimbursements go down. And I think everyone's going to need to know these things in terms of the process that they need to put in place for their practice so they can, it could be a win-win for the practice, the providers, the patients themselves. The patients improve on communication, the providers, they get more time back, and the practices can generate more revenue to grow and scale, right, over a period of time and actually build a brand. So in terms of things for me, it's like I'm looking at the greater purpose of like, what can I do with my time to help the most people possible? And that is going to be on the AdVital side versus the surgical side is just one-on-one, right? And so I can take the skills, leverage, that piece of it and knowing, hey, what does it take from the inside out? Because most of these softwares are not built by somebody that's on the inside. They're built by people on the outside, what they assume that somebody will need, right? They haven't lived the life of like, okay, what does my patient care coordinator need? What does my front desk need? What do I need, right? To give the patient the ultimate experience in a practice so that they're raving about it and we're doing the right thing that we love doing every day, right? It's on both ends. And so I think that's where everything is headed for me.
And I love the perspective of, boots on the ground, you're in the trenches, and dealing with the day to day of issues, even today, right? You even see issues today where you could, we probably need to be adding this to to the platform.
Yeah.
Uh, and so it's kind of a never ending thing as life and our businesses change, that's going to continue to change. Um, so when you're talking to, I just want to know personally, I don't know of a surgeon who's done this, right? That went from successful plastic surgery, private practice, you doing very well in your practice, that, I mean, what is your wife, family, what do they say when you're like, hey, I've got this, this AdVital company, I'm gonna, I'm thinking of just doing it full time. Are they
Yeah.
think you're crazy?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, my mom thinks I'm crazy, right? And my wife is extremely supportive because she sees the greater vision, right? She sees the why behind what I'm doing and, what I've been meant to do. I think, it's like having zones of geniuses, right? And so I think the software with what I'm doing with it in terms of plastic surgery, aesthetics, med spas, and medicine is a zone of genius for me. I think plastic surgery itself was a zone of genius in terms of treating patients in that part of it, but now amplifying it one step further in terms of the software. I think, everyone already knew that like I was already computer inclined. I mean, I changed things in each one of the residencies I went to, whether it was like, hey, a scheduling, hey, we can't see the schedule from home. And I'm like, why? Right. I'm bold enough to ask why, and then actually come up with a solution that actually works and, and made it easier for everybody, right? And then even when I was in general surgery in the ICU, like, why do I have to write the same note every day? Like, I was just like, why am I doing? Why is my hand hurting? And there's no mental, challenge in this. I'm like, why can't we just put this on a computer
Right.
and then just adjust it day by day? And they were like, well, that sounds like a good idea. But how do we do that? And I was like, okay, well, here's how we do it. And we literally did it. I mean, I did it and I was an intern, right? And I was rotating through the ICU and I literally did it and it took me like maybe 3 days, right? And then from then on, I got an email from the billing of this hospital, this like major hospital system. They were like, thank you so much. Now we can read the notes. And then like 3 months later, I got an email from the head administrator and was like, our revenue has exponentially increased since they can read the notes. And now they're billing for things that they weren't billing for before. And I'm like, I had no idea about these things. This was just a byproduct of making it easier in terms of writing the notes, but there's all these downstream things, right? And sometimes we don't see the bigger picture. And I think in a lot of practices, we don't see the bigger picture of where the time could be allocated for your staff outside of the repetitive tasks?
And I'm going to kind of jump into another area that I think people want to know about. I mean, people have heard about lead management, and I've been preaching sales and, as part of advertising and marketing for the better part of 25 years, right? We can get the phone to ring, we can get emails to come in, but at that particular point, there's a difference between being mildly successful and wildly successful.
Mm-hmm.
And that is in the follow-up, the intake, the devil's in the detail. So give them our audience today, give me some, what you are seeing in terms of when you use this type of platform and you're managing it correctly to make better decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen, documented revenue? Like when you're saying you made this update in this platform, and then, now all of a sudden everybody's getting in touch with you saying, man, this is so great. Even it's boiling down to revenue. So how does it boil down to revenue?
Yeah. So I think that, I think you hit the nail on the head. Like the fortune is in the follow-up. And what we realize, by putting our philosophy of measuring to manage, and then that management helps improve, in that piece of it, there's certain specific time points that you need to follow up with the leads and also your patients that get quotes. A lot of the money that's left on the table is like you do a quote on somebody, and 42% of people that get a quote from somebody will actually get that procedure done. But we only follow up for 2 weeks. And now if I only follow for 2 weeks, I did the hard work. I prescribed you what treatment plan that you needed, all the things that you wanted. And now you're going to take that to somebody else because you're like, oh, I saw this other advertisement. They seem nice. They're following up with me. They're talking to me. They're calling me. So that's where the details are, right? In terms of like that fortune is in the follow-up. Some of our practices have doubled their revenue like in a year, right? And like they've literally added, $2 million to their bottom line over 1 year just by putting the processes in place that their staff are supported. It doesn't remove the staff completely, but it helps them do the higher level things, right? Ultimately, you want to get to a point where your staff is making decisions. They're not doing tasks. The tasks, the computers can do them. Like Elon Musk, has said it. I think Jeff Bezos has said it. Any repetitive task will get replaced by a robot or a machine. And so when we think about these practices and what we're doing, there's a ton of repetitive tasks. Even so much of the EMRs, like, I can make wild predictions in terms of, hey, what do I think is coming? I mean, I don't think there'll be a use of notes in the future. I think it'll be video consultations, and it'll just be a repository of video consults and plans that you might have. And that's it. And I think that would ease up a lot of the documentation, the extra hours doctors have to do for all these things. It's an easy, right?
And I think the idea of, the repetitiveness, when you add in the human element, there's always gaps, right? Even though we're supposed to, like a surgeon, we try to cover everything, right? Make sure that we're covering all bases. But let's face it, there are times when, I didn't mention that, or I should have said that, or, so those kinds of things happen. One of the things that you mentioned was the follow-up. May take, you may follow up with them for a week or 2 weeks. In fact, 2 weeks is good, I think, by most practice standards. I don't think after 2 weeks, I think most of these leads fall, to the wayside, or even consultations. If they don't book right then, they just fall between the cracks. Mm-hmm. Knowing that the average consumer spends months, if not, as the society says, it could be years before they ultimately build up enough courage, have the money, or something happens in their life when that zero moment of truth happens, and they're going to do something about it, right? So they spend all this building up, all this emotional momentum, yet we only stay in front of them for a really short period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like, people are motivated by two things. Either they're running away from fear, right? Or they're running towards pleasure. And so in terms of that piece of it, the nurturing and the amount of touch points, it used to say 8 to 12 touch points. Now it's gone up to 12 to 15 touch points that are required to get people to do the next thing, to see what's in it for them, right? It's like the society is changing. Like, what's in it for me? How can you meet me in the conversation that I'm having? And so now it's almost like you have to turn into a semi-magician to be like, hey, in what phase of the conversation are you in? So then I can show you the path forward, and it be super simple, super easy for you to live your best life for the longest amount of time. Right. And I think it's like, before, I think, in terms of billboards and marketing, it wasn't about meeting people in the conversation. It was to evoke emotion. And that emotion then started the conversation. Now, I think people are like, they're past that. They've become tolerant to that. And so it's like, now you got to evoke emotion and meet them in the conversation at the exact point that they're either considering it or they're just in awareness phase, to actually do the next steps in doing that part for them, right? And this is super important in cosmetics, especially in terms of aesthetics, because there's a whole psychology behind it. There's a mindset piece of it, right? Like there's books that are written about this, Psycho-Cybernetics by Maxwell Maltz, right? You can change someone's nose and you can make it look perfect on the outside, but if they don't feel it on the inside, their mentality will not change. So in terms of what we do as providers now, it's amplified, right? It's psychology with the physicality of what we're doing in terms of the changes.
So in terms of the follow-up that you recommend, because most practices, when we secret shop or mystery shop, leads and how they're handling stuff, and we also see how long do they engage multiple times? Do they respond with multiple things? What do you recommend for practices that are, in that or not seeing the conversions happening consistently with their staff? What can you do? What can AdVital do? And how many follow-ups do you recommend? And is that all email? Is that text message? How does that all work?
Yeah, so there's different spike points, right? And so we've been able to analyze the data, and we've actually fed it through a machine learning to say, hey, what are the critical time points? And so critical time points are day -1 till day 3, right? And having a process where your patient care coordinator that's going to meet them on the day of the consult, the day before, super important. Your no-show rate goes down. They put a voice and emotion to the name and the practice. Now they meet the same person. Now they know, and then when they meet the doctor, they can trust them as well. There's pre-nurture sequences in terms of videos that we use for patients to know me better, right, before they come in. So that way my consultation times turn into Q&As versus me having to talk to them about all the ins and outs of what is a breast augmentation? What type of implants are out there? They already know that. So they're asking, what should I do for me, right? And that is a better conversation. So day -1 till day 3, the day of consult, and then the day after is the most important time to follow up from your patient care coordinator. And this is usually a phone call and a text message. It's not an email, right? Okay. If they don't book at that time point, then there's the next time point that ends up happening in 3 weeks. And so you have to nurture them between those 3 weeks. And we usually recommend an email a week, right? For that period of time.
Okay. So basically once a week.
Once a week, an email, right? And then also once a week, a text message. Okay. So text message, the open rate is 98%.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Versus an email. An email is nowhere near that, right? In terms of nowadays, because we get flooded in terms of inbox. But a text message, 98%, right? And so the messaging has to be on point. It has to be tied to what they came in for. It has to be tied into possibly the objection they may have had, why they didn't book, and how can you help them get over that objection. That other 3 weeks, then after that, we saw another peak at 6 weeks, right? And so there was the first 3 days, then essentially the 3 weeks, 6 weeks, and then out at 3 months. And so we found that 60% of our patients were still opening up our emails at 3 months later.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Yeah.
And so we were literally put them on a cadence of once a week, essentially for 3 months. And then after that, we go to the newsletter that essentially goes out once a month, just to keep them top of mind of saying, hey, these are things that we're doing and what we're offering. This might, be of interest to you, right? If we're going to do any events or anything like that, any group consultations or anything like that, then we can throw those events in there as well in terms of the cadence that goes out for communication, in terms of email and text message. Sometimes also our text message, we're texting them to a social media post, not just a text message that gives them the information, because we want them to then go and see what we've been doing on social to see if they find something else that, suits them of what can help them right now and right here.
Right. And I think that's where you're combining that, information or even that emotion, but also with the engagement part where you're saying you've got to meet them in the middle kind of thing.
Yep.
So it's kind of not just, siloing it in, we're going to send emails and this is what we do, because that's what we used to do years ago. We used to just say, okay, put them in a nurturing campaign and you just run it. This is actually so much more different because I'm reaching them with different messaging at different stages of the cycle. So there's a lot more psychology involved with this process, as opposed to just say, oh, well, they didn't schedule, so we'll just drop them into a newsletter, right? So, that was old school. Now, all of a sudden, we have the ability, the technology to manage leads. So if somebody does respond, I don't want them to keep getting this stuff. What happens? How do we keep, a potential patient that said, okay, hey, now I'm good, I'm ready to do something. And how do we turn that? Does that turn off, or how is that manual? How does that all work?
Yeah, so it's all automated, right? So if they reply and they do the next thing, right? So if they reply to say they want to talk to somebody, then it automatically will ping our patient care coordinator. It'll turn off the automations, and as long as the close actually happens, right? Or it puts them into a different nurturing sequence of like, hey, check back with me in 3 months. We can put them in a manual follow-up that is pseudo-automated, pseudo-manual. So in 3 months, it'll automatically ping our staff to say, hey, follow up with this person. They were interested in this, right? If they don't want all the different drip content that's out there. So there's all these different ways of setting it up. Your process is dependent on where you live. There's different people in different parts of the country. And it's different. Like you have to do something different in New York versus California versus Miami versus Chicago versus Houston versus Dallas. Every single area is a little bit different of what's accepted in the culture. Once you can figure out that piece, then you know what your patients want from you. And then you can build out the system within our software to automatically do that messaging, the other piece. We also, we just rolled out AI this week actually for our practice in terms of when they respond, the AI starts having the conversation with them. And it's AI powered by a human. It's not the other way around, right? And so what it is the AI starts the conversation. If it gets stuck, it then lets the staff know, and the staff takes over in terms of the conversation. It's pretty seamless in terms of that piece of it. But in terms of people wanting to know your location or all the common FAQ questions, it's able to give those answers. Right. And then it drives them to an online booking, which they can fill out all the required information. So you're not having to transfer it down the road, right? And that's the whole thing. Every place that you can transfer is a possible, area for a mistake. And so if you have a typo, if you have an address error, this and that, whatever, there can be some issues down the road in terms of taking payments and the other stuff. And so we've tried to streamline the entire thing, because you think about it right now, it's like you go to get a massage, you literally just go to the online booking piece, click the date and time, they take a credit card, they've already taken payment, right? What's so different of what we're doing, right? There's not that much difference in terms of the booking side of it. And so we've trained some AI to do the appropriate conversations to have with patients in terms of nurturing them to get them to actually book the appointments. And then from there, we're, in the next quarter or so, we're actually rolling out a back office AI that will know the patient's story and then be able to talk to them about that to get them to overcome their objections.
So are you right now, or are you planning on incorporating some of the, say, on website engagement elements like live chat and adding those features where you're actually managing that all in one system? Or because I know there's live chat services out there, or bots or stuff like that.
We already do, right? So we already do in terms of it's a web chat, but the web chat is transferred over to a text message conversation. And the reason is that there's a 14% bump in actual conversion when you go off the computer to someone's cell phone.
Yeah. No,
so we're just using the psychology of that, and especially in the field that we do, right? People want to be private and secret. Mm-hmm. A phone is way more private and secret than a screen.
Right. Psychologically, completely correct. One of the things that I would say are actually several things that came up in our conversation today in terms of differentiators, because I've heard of other lead tracking software, right? There's a handful of them out there. But some of the differentiators that we're talking about is it's not just tracking the leads, it's what are you doing with them and how are you helping staff, manage in some cases a high volume of leads, right? A high volume. They can't keep up with it, and yet this isn't all they do. A lot of time it's the PCC, patient care coordinator, that's also doing all the follow up too, and they're wearing a lot of hats, and they can't always get to the sales side, right? So,
yeah, and absolutely. And so it's like we have certain clients that have 10,000 leads a month, right? And as the leads come in, we're able to organize them. So it's one piece of like getting them in and start responding in terms of the conversation, but then organizing them into qualified or unqualified to do the next things that they need to do in terms of the process to get the entire funnel kind of made out. And, the funnel concept is probably new for a lot of practices. And it's just a matter of saying, hey, what do I do in terms of marketing to get someone to the entire journey of what happens in my practice? And that's the funnel, right? In terms of the simplest way.
No, I think you touched on so many things today. And I hope our listeners will follow up and follow your lead, because I think I recommend you guys, and I get no financial incentives from you, right? I don't get paid. I'm not incentivized to promote you at all, but I do at every turn simply because I know it works. I know it works what you guys do, and you guys have filled a gap, at least from a marketer side, my side. You filled a gap for a lot of our practices that I didn't have the ability to implement anything like this for a lot of my clients. So how can some of our audience get more information from you? How can they learn more about the details? And even just, you're great with the education side, even if you're not even working with them, right? Even if they're not clients, how can they start on that path?
Yeah, so we have a YouTube channel on AdVital that I go give free content in terms of, hey, what are the best processes? What are the best metrics? Like, even without the software, how can you use these things to make your practice function better? And the things I wish I would have known, 5 years ago, right? And so that's one place. Another place that you can find the details is advitalmd.com. And then also on my LinkedIn as well, you can find Dr. Shitel Patel. And I give away tons of value in terms of, hey, what does it take in terms of marketing clarity, sales, operations, and then the other piece of the attribution, right? Of what do you do with it? How do you actually make a decision from the data that's in front of you? Because a lot of data can be misleading. And I think a lot of people put all these things and it confuses you. You need to break through the noise to actually, be the needle in the haystack that can puncture the next layer that you want to, right? If you keep going at it with a larger piece of object and stuff like that, it's going to take a lot more force. You want the thing that takes the least amount of force so you can get to the next stage in your practice to grow and scale. And so that's the main sources that you can find me at. And, appreciate your support, Bill. You guys are awesome at MedShark. And for us, it's always a privilege to work with good agencies, because we want to show them that, when we show practices that these agencies are doing their job. They're driving in the leads. We need to do our part in the process after the leads come in to actually get the whole machine to churn like it should. So that way we can make the greatest impact in our local communities and nationwide.
Yeah, well, super. Dr. Patel, thank you again for your time today. I really hope we'll have a chance to have a second interview with you as we I'd like to get into this AI stuff. At some particular point, it's going to change what we do. It'll change what you're doing. Maybe somewhere in the near future, we can kind of reschedule and invite people to join us for a discussion on AI.
Absolutely. I think, for us, like we're lacing our entire system with AI. And so I think that's where everything's headed, to help support. It's not to replace, but to support the entire staff. So that way you can get staff to make decisions. Right.
And then I think AI, what it also does is it adapts to, the most important person, that's our consumers. It's, it learns the patience. It learns kind of that type of stuff. So we'll have another conversation about that because I'm all excited about that. But hey, thank you again for your time today, and we'll be chatting with you here shortly.
Thanks, Bill.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us for the MedShark Insider with Bill Fukui. Join us next week for another dive into all things medical marketing. All episodes can be streamed at www.medsharkdigital.com/medshark-insider.